Hello everyone, I am joined by Senton, who is a strategist of the new world, this new landscape of spin and goes, and also a contributor for Upswing Poker. Now, we spoke a few weeks ago, Senton, about how to qualify using spin and goes to get to some of these amazing and glamorous tournaments. But I think something in the last couple of years that's happened is that a lot of these tournaments are populated by a lot of spin and go qualifiers who are their own sort of brand of players. So talk to me a little bit about once you make it and you get into one of these tournaments, how do you play and adjust your play against your spin and go type qualifier?
Right. So if they're just like recreational qualifiers, then it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really tell you much about the player, just that they played a spin and go and got lucky. As far as the players who actually make a living from spin and goes, who qualify it and are kind of hyper turbo specific players, what's important is to realize that for one, they're specialists in shorthanded play. And that doesn't just mean like when there are only 2 or 3 players, but at a 9-handed tables, when pots become 2 and 3-handed, when we get into a heads-up situation in a pot, they're really adept at playing. A lot of them don't know the deeper stack as well, but a lot come from cash backgrounds or tournament backgrounds where there is that too. And so for one, you got to realize, like, if you're not super experienced, you're probably they probably have a pretty strong edge over you in those situations. Now, the things you can take away is that they're generally going to be hyper aggressive. So this is my downfall at almost every big tournament that I play at, is that it's really hard sometimes to take your foot off the gas. You're playing hour after hour, day after day, years at a time sometimes, where you just have your foot on the gas constantly. Especially someone like me who comes from a heads-up hyper turbo before spin and go. So that's even more an aggressive approach. And so against those players, what you really want to do is you want to give them rope to hang themselves, as the poker saying goes. And when you have your big hands, a lot of the times it's best to just check call, and just wait for them to bomb away. To not be scared by bets that keep coming at you. To sometimes call down your middle pairs and bottom pairs, like Gordon Veo was the big example last World Series, who kind of made some huge folds in situations where you could hear every spin and go player across the world being like, no, you can't fold there, you can't fold.
Snap off the triple barrel, please.
Absolutely. I mean, you're playing heads-up poker. Ranges are incredibly wide, and so it's really important to not get scared just because there's multiple barrels coming at you. And so against those players, against the spin and go players, it's really important to just don't be afraid and battle some aggression with your own aggression. If they're going to be bombing at you every time, then you got to employ stuff like check raises. You have to start barreling them back. You have to put them on their toes. You can't just let them have their game, otherwise you're just in big trouble.
You have to make them put their foot on the brake. Well, I wanted to ask you too, just, as someone who is such a big part of this site, Spin and Go Strategy, is this something, poker in general is something where the edges are getting less and less, and, new games, I think, might be the closest opportunity that a lot of players have to feel like they could get an edge, although new games are not as figured out some of the time. So tell me a little bit about you kind of coming into this, and do you feel like this is something that if studied well, people might be able to get an edge in this no-limit world?
Absolutely. With these, so most of the sites are going down towards games that are really quick, a lot of action, something that a recreational player is going to enjoy, which is action, speed, not spending too much time. You can pull out your phone on your lunch break and get a handful of games in. For one, I'd say at the higher limits, like for the spin and goes, they go up to $100. And I'd say at the $100 limit, because people have been doing it now for a couple of years, a lot of it is quote unquote solved. So it's going to be tough for you to go in off the street and start to have an edge there. But at the lower stakes, there's still tons of room. And really the key is going to be to spend a lot of time in the lab. Because the game trees are really narrow in spin and goes, there's only so much you can do with that amount of big blinds. There's only so much you can do in 5 minutes. It actually makes it really easy to study. There's not that many options. When you're playing 10 big blind with a 10 big blind stack, there's really not many choices that you have. And so by spending a bit of time in the lab, you can get that 10 big blind, 15 big blind, even up to 25 big blind game trees. You can get those pretty down pat pretty quickly. So to anyone who's trying to make it in these games, who's trying to maybe come over from tournaments or cash games and kind of sees the writing on the wall, which is, games are going to faster, more action. Get in the lab and study those game trees, figure out what am I going to do at 15 big blinds, and not only what am I going to do, but how am I going to react to these various player types. And we talk about that on spinandgostrategy.com. I write about that on Upswing Poker, is how do you play against the different kind of players that you're going to face. You're going to have your maniacs, you're going to have your opponents, me, a little bit of a maniac for sure. You're going to have your players coming from other formats who are just there to kind of like punt off a stack.
Me.
And you maybe, if you're welcome to come to my tables if that's the case. But you just really have to have in your mind there's only a handful of player types. So really before you hit the tables is really think about once you've played 5 hands, you could kind of start to get 5 to 10 hands. You can start to get an idea of which type of player you're playing. And then you should have your adjustments set beforehand. It shouldn't be, I'm at the table and I'm trying to make an adjustment. I'm trying to calculate, against this player, what would be the best strategy. Since there's so few of them, just figure it out before you sit at the table. And so by the time you're there, you'd say, oh, this guy's a maniac. Okay, I'm going to start check calling, check calling, check calling. Or this guy comes from a deep cash background and has no idea of how aggressive he's going to be. So I'm just going to click that button until the wheels fall off, right? Just click, 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 and just get it done. But yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake recreational players make is that they go in without a game plan, or they go in being like, okay, it's faster, I'll play more hands. But how many more hands? And in what way? And a lot of players aren't used to limping. Like, how am I going to incorporate a limping strategy in my game? Am I just going to push fold 15 big blinds? That's not going to be an optimal strategy for the most part. So it's really taking these, like, there's only 10, 20, 30 different things that you can really investigate. And if you spend a week, a month, a couple of months figuring it out, then your edge over all but the very top players is going to be massive. So just go spend some time in the lab.
The one thing where you might be able to acquire an edge in a few months, I definitely would suggest then checking it out. Well, I appreciate it so much, Senton. You guys will definitely want to check it out as well if you want to get to the tippy top or the next to the tippy top of your game on spinandgostrategy.com. And we can also find tons of fantastic articles on upswingpoker.com. Thank you guys so much. You're on pokernews.com.